Guys, welcome, welcome. So let me kick things off. Thank you so much for joining today. Obviously, from the chat, you can see we have a very eclectic audience and lots of familiar names and faces out there. So whatever time of the day it is for you today, thank you for investing and attending today. My name is Chris Wren. I'm the co-founder of XDS Spark. I'm also the founder of the XDS conference. And I hope that you guys have been enjoying the Spark webinar series that we've been running in recent months that brings attention to important subjects that hopefully benefit those of us in the external development community. I have to profusely thank Summer and her colleague, Dongli, for bringing this critical topic to the forefront and unfortunately sometimes a largely underserved topic. And also, of course, thanking today's expert panelists for contributing their knowledge and experience. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic to Summer O'Brien. And please, Summer, take it from here.
Awesome, will do. Thank you again, Chris, so much for hosting this, XDS Spark. This has been a really great opportunity. Hi, everyone. I am Summer O'Brien. I'm the director of XDev at Riot Games. When I had the opportunity to talk to Chris about this, this is a space that obviously I'm very passionate about, looking at trying to build relationships with partners. It'd be great to have this conversation at the industry level. And so thank you so much to Harry, Aubra, and Raphaël for joining Dongli and I as we kind of start that conversation. So I'll kick us off with this panel with a question that can also be part of your introduction. So after I ask this question, I'll actually go through each of you, have you introduce who you are, where you're at, kind of what's your role related to security, and then answer the question. So the starting question is, what are the most important things you look for when evaluating the security risk of a service provider? I'll kick off with Dongli.
Thanks, Summer. Hi, everyone. My name is Dongli Shi, and currently I'm the product lead for partner security at Riot Games. Partner security, in most people's language, that would be third-party risk management, right? So I've been at Riot for a little bit more than a year. And before my time here, I was working for another developer and publisher in a similar capacity. And to Summer's question, what are the most important things I will look for when evaluating a new service provider? I think really three major components. The first is transparency and communication from the service provider in terms of what they can provide, their security capabilities, and what they are willing to work with us on. And that goes into the second part, the willingness to work with InfoSec team or IT teams, right, on the review, the security themselves, and any subsequent remediation. And the last but also important part is comparatively high level of awareness over security-related principles. So yeah, we can go into more details later, but yeah, I will leave this to Raphaël.
Thank you, Dongli. So Raphaël Greco, I'm working at Ubisoft as a security team lead. I manage a little team of security agents, so security specialists and security analysts. We have many different topics to tackle every day. We try to prioritize a little bit because we have work for the next 10 years to come, but we prioritize. To give you a rough idea, identity and access management, network change support, risk analysis, and the support of the good integration of our code developers into our productions. So we'll talk about it today. We'll focus only on that. We'll not speak too much on the rest, I assure you. So that's a good question. I don't know for the other participant, but there is two big aspects that I looked at, and it's the most important. There is the technical aspect, where I quickly looked at the setup environment of our partners. The most important things are the work from home setup. Thanks to the COVID now, a lot of people work from home, and some companies didn't have the time or they didn't have the structure to deploy a secure work from home environment. It has been a big change in the industry for that. And also the bring your own device. A lot of companies, like it's great artists. They are incredible, but they are not IT technicians. They don't have a security team, so they do their best to produce what they produce, but they don't have a security in their DNA. So I look at the structure kind, like is it a freelancer? Is it a medium company which is starting? Or is it a big company of keywords or stuff like that? So this is my answer. Well, Aubra, the mic is yours.
Awesome, thank you. Good morning. I'm Aubra Moore, and I manage the infrastructure and engineering security teams at 343 Industries, which is a studio that makes Halo. I may accidentally use the term partner instead of service provider, so just to be aware, but I will try to use service provider and be consistent. So we take a holistic view over the security posture. Some key areas or questions we ask are, what is their logical separation between the machines that will be used for our project and the rest of the network? Do they have an annual security program for their users, and does it include anti-phishing? We ask a number of questions related to access control. For example, how do they secure privileged accounts? What does their MFA solution look like? Do they have persistent admins in their environment, or do they use a just-in-time solution? We also look at their endpoint security and what they use for vulnerability management. As well, we ask questions about their incident response process and like Raphaël was saying, if they allow users to work remotely and what their remote solution looks like. And then we also look at results of a recent penetration test. That's the general overview of what we start with when evaluating a service provider.
Thank you so much.
So I can hand that off to Harry.
Hey everyone, thanks Aubra. My name is Harry Hong, and I'm a technical director in the security organization at Electronic Arts. A lot of my work is focused on how do we enable our folks to work safely and do their best work. And that does also include service providers that we work with to deliver games. And with regards to kind of the question of what are the things that we look for when evaluating service providers, I would say the primary focus is really around how can they safeguard, or how will they safeguard our data or intellectual property that they'll be working with. Now, with regards to the specifics of how we go about assessing that, it's a lot of what Aubra kind of mentioned, really kind of having questions around kind of their operations and their practices and their IT control. So that's really kind of how we go about assessing, how well they'll be able to protect the data that we're entrusting them with.
Thank you all so much. We'll jump into question 2. So how do you determine risk associated with a particular engagement or mandate with a service provider? Anybody want to kick us off for that one?
I can take it.
Thank you.
It's a really interesting one for me because I revamped the process recently. It's still in revamp, in fact, it's not finished yet. We have the big picture. So we determine the risk. The base approach, it's a technical one. Like we ask questions exactly the same than Aubra was mentioning. Endpoint security, if they have MFA, central authentication, how they harden their computer, all that. After that, we see the posture, the security posture of our code. We grade them A, B, C. C, you have a not so good security posture. B, medium security posture. A, whoa, thank you. So based on that, we see a little bit what they will have to access to ensure their mandate. For example, a localization tester will need to access only localization data. An engine developer might need access to the engine, and it unlocks a new process. So there is the base approach, which is based on a matrix, where we compare the security posture of our co-developers and the security posture of the solution and the access that will be required for the mandate. The more the access to the Ubisoft network, for example, or to a sensitive application is required, the more we will be strict in terms of security posture for our code. So this is the base approach, a matrix. After that, there is 2 exceptions. The first one is the freelancer exception. As said before, a freelancer, like he buy his computer on Amazon, he don't have a security agent, don't have antivirus, stuff like that. So we have to be very conscious about that. So we just don't ask questions to the freelancers because we know that from the start, they will not have a good security posture. So it's an exception, and we have dedicated solution for them and to ensure that they will be working with us safely. I can mention like a secure connection to a Ubisoft own corporate on our studio. There is an ongoing project which is called Cloud Crate. It's a solution in the cloud it's an RDP in the cloud, basically. So we create a virtual machine and the freelancer access it in a secure way. And after that, you can work safely. But nothing can be retrieved for this machine. So we have exception about that. And the last exception is the engine sharing assessment. I would be curious from my other partner that are attending here, but at Ubisoft, the engine is our custom engine, like the internal ones. So we have Anvil, Snowdrop, maybe other ones, but it's the two mains. And at the moment, we need to share this engine. We take big precautions. So this is an additional assessment where not only security is involved, but also the strategic level, the production. I have the list of the name, but a lot of people, and they provide their feedback on this partner, and if they are confident that this partner will take care of our baby, our engine, because this is what makes our game so great. So this is the final one. It's a sum up of all the involved partners and deciders, and at the end, we take the decision based on all people review. So I hope it answered the question. We can talk about it for hours, so we pass the mic to Ari.
Absolutely. Anyone have something to add about how do we determine the risk on a per mandate or per engagement perspective?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Raphaël hit most of the marks, right? Like I feel for most of the mature organization, we all probably have a little chart or scribble somewhere with a matrix to say, hey, when the complexity and the sensitivity of data increase with the engagement, the security requirements comparatively will also increase to that service provider, right? And based off that, right, like there's an inherent risk of the level of data access the service provider will have and nature of the engagement, right? Like are they a coded partner or are they just doing QA or localization? And that's an inherent risk, right? Like comes with the engagement and the vendor security posture itself. And the second part of that is also what we call the residual risk of a particular engagement. That's when we work with the partner to conduct the assessment and to figure out, hey, here are the gaps, here are the things that we would love to be in place before we start working with you, right? And come after that is the residual risk. Basically, this is engagement, this is a control we know that are already in place, and there are the additional remediation in place, and how does it look like? And if the residual risk is still pretty high, and based on that, we might say, hey, we can really accept this engagement at the current level. Maybe we will ship you our hardware, right? So we know what's going on. Or like Raphaël mentioned, another thing is VDI, which I'm pretty interested in. We can talk about in a bit too. So yeah, absolutely. I think Raphaël hit pretty much all the points. But to follow up on the last point, right? Like for freelancers or individual contractors, right? It seems Ubisoft has carved out a path for VMs for them to perform the services. But have you experienced any performance issue or cost concerns in terms of managing or provisioning VMs to a lot, right? Ubisoft is a huge company, so I assume there are a lot of ICs working in that space. Are there any cost concern or technical challenges in terms of performances when you when you manage that space?
It's a very good question. I'm not the project manager of this thing, but they provide me good insight. So I have some pieces of information, take it with a little bit of salt, but I will tell you what I'm sure of. There is the money question. This is a big question because it costs a lot when you deploy a VM on the cloud. With GPU capacity, the prices are boom, like that. But at the end, it will be Ubisoft paying for it because the partner doesn't have the security. So we say, okay, we will lose money because we work with a partner. And because we choose this partner, it would be costlier than if we choose a big company. But at the end, the kind of persons that we are talking about, like it's really genius in the industry. I will give you an example. Like a localization guy, a voice artist that has this voice that nobody has because he's the last one of his I don't know the English word, but he has this voice that nobody else in the world has, and it's totally fixed with the production. And the producer said, I need this guy, there is no way. So we say, okay, so at the end, we have two options because we cannot say no to a producer for such things that are critical for the game. So, or we take a risky pass and we like deploy something crappy and we open walls and incidents will occur, or we take on us and at the end, deploying such virtual machine, the cost will be far less than if we open a big wall impacting whole Ubisoft. At the worst case here with these kind of things, we impact the production. Not a big deal.
Yeah, one thing that I'd like to kind of add to what was already covered, another area that we kind of consider is kind of past history, especially with service providers that we may have already worked with in the past, and security issues that we may have come across with them. So for example, like maybe they had a security incident that put our data at risk. But as Raphaël mentioned, they might be partners that are super critical for us to do our work, and we need them. And so those would be things where we'll continue to work with them, but we'll identify ways in which we could safely do that. So that's certainly a part of consideration of service providers as well for us.
And I'll say from my point of view, much of what I would say has already been covered. Absolutely, the type of engagement really changes the risk involved. But to determine risk, we do send our security questionnaire that currently has over 150 different security questions just as a starting point. And we're constantly evolving our questionnaire as well, updating that as new security concerns come up. And then like Dongli was talking about with question 1, we consider our partners or the service providers' willingness to address the security gaps as part of the risk. And I thought it was interesting that Dongli was talking about the residual risk. And one thing that we've started doing as well is having an annual security process, even for ongoing partners. So it's not just an initial engagement, it's throughout the engagement.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for that.
I have an interesting point, Summer, if I can take the mic.
Absolutely.
We work exactly like Aubra said. We have a portal and our providers need to go on this portal and provide as much answer as Aubra, like 100 questions. Do you have a policy on that? A policy on that? Do you have firewalls securing your perimeter? Blah, 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 blah. You can imagine all these questions you can dream of. And it might be very painful for our partners because each time they need to contract with a new game industry partner, they will have to answer those 100 questions again and again. Like imagine the amount of time they have to fulfill those questions. And there is something that we are studying, spoiler alert, at Ubisoft. In the movie industry, they have the same question back in time. And now they have one platform where suppliers go on this platform, they fulfill one questionnaire, and then all the movie industry goes there and look at the provided sources. So there is a lot of software or solutions in the wild that allow for that. And we are actually studying if we can help our suppliers by just asking them to go on this platform, fulfill one times, and that's just no name, Caroline, no name, but yes, like CyberGRX, it's one of the solution which exist on the market. and it will reduce a lot the onboarding time, because it can, like, imagine answering 100 questions. It takes time. It takes really time. And we sometimes we are picky. We say, okay, we provided this proof, but can you be more precise, please? If the partner has provided all the proof one times, done. Never you will have to do it again, like, or every year. That's it. I'm curious to see with you all if it's something that you've studied or is on the way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think there are two ways to kind of reduce the friction between we need the information from the service provider and the service provider be like, guys, enough security questionnaire, right? So I think the first point, like Raphael mentioned, yeah, like movie industry or entertainment, I guess they have that already, to some degree. And I think a second point that I might be curious to hear from our service provider folks and friends is, would you be more interested in answering 5 different kinds of questionnaires for different engagement? Or would your security or IT team be open, hey, if we are a long-term partner, right? Like, would you be open to have some kind of security agent installed on some of your devices that are dedicated for certain clients' work? So at least we can, from a continuous monitoring perspective, we can know for certain you are compliant with some of the requirements that we are looking for without using your client devices, right? But just an open-ended question. I'm curious to hear from our partners and folks later in the call, probably. So,
Thank you all. That's actually a really great transition into what our next question was going to be. And I want to highlight something that I'd actually heard from the industry, which was this concept of like, hey, I've already done a security review with this company, but why do I have to do it again? And really what I was hitting on from each of you in that last question was it's per engagement. Just because we've worked with you before, this, this use case may be entirely different. And that is where we're starting from scratch. And it sounds, Raphael, thank you for pointing that there looks to be like opportunity in the industry for us to find ways to make this easier and better for both the service providers, but also for ourselves, right? Going through and manually reviewing each of these every time can be a challenge. So that will be our segue into the next question was, do you review service providers from a advisor capacity or more black and white, like go, no go? And who all is involved in that decision making?
You want
Yeah,
to go?
oops,
Let's start with Harry.
You can go. You
sorry.
can go.
Yeah, I'll just kind of start off as saying, yeah, generally we kind of act in the capacity of advisors. Ultimately, our business or studios make the final decision of whether or not they want to work with the service provider. But we kind of view our responsibility as kind of equipping them with the right knowledge to make an informed decision. And so that comes through with a lot of the information that was discussed earlier. Kind of Aubra kind of mentioned a lot of these framework-based assessments and so forth, that having that information available, and then kind of our interpretation of what does that mean. So that's really a key part. The other aspect of it is, at the end of the day, if a business does or a studio does decide to move forward with working with a service provider that we feel is a little bit of a high risk, we will continue to work with them to kind of figure out a plan for how we get safer. And that would include things like, hey, here's a specific phased approach remediation plan that we want you guys to take, and see if they're open to that. I think a lot of what the other panelists have kind of explained around, this is a two-way street, kind of a partnership with the service providers to see what we can do together. And then internally, we do also track that plan. And so that's one of the key things that we've kind of learned throughout the years is, it's not enough to say, hey, do you have a plan for this? Okay, great, go execute it. But we actually track it to make sure that it comes through. And so that's another way that we kind of help manage that risk if, we decide to kind of proceed forward with working with a partner.
Awesome. Thank you, Harry. So it looks like it's very much on the advisory side. Is there somebody have someone a little bit more on the go, no go side?
yeah, I mean, I think it probably also depends on the maturity of the organization in terms of the risk awareness, right? So like at my current place, I feel we are probably 80%, 90% still the kind of no-go and no-go person. We did provide an escalation pass or a kind of exception process to say, hey, this vendor is critical to your business or to your process. And as long as the executive sponsor and you agree, acknowledge the risk and kind of own up to it, we still we can still let you work with it. And luckily so far we haven't had experienced or received too many kind of those exception requests. And I think as an organization continuing to mature, right? Like as more employees, more folks are more risk aware and they know what they should be looking for and how they should communicate with our service providers and partners in terms of what we are looking for. I think the model from a go, no go, absolutely kind of role will shifting more to Harry mentioned, right? Like an advisory role, as long as the deal owners, the stakeholder, they understand the risks, the impact, and how we can work together on that. But I think I'm also curious to hear from Harry a little bit, depending on, if it's confidential, that's absolutely fine. But I'm curious to hear if, like, from your internal stakeholder, right? Let's say I'm an EP or I'm just a producer, whatever. Do we have some kind of consensus with them to say, hey, if your service provider are not working with us after the getting the contract, after the getting paid, what are the likely paths forward, right? Like, because people will be, oh, I get your money. Like, I don't care. I will just work with the producer as long as I create content and, I'm fine, right? So are there kind of consolidation or are there kind of consensus between you and the stakeholders on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And one of the things that we always try to make sure as decisions are being made is who's allowed to make that decision. And really, we kind of drive it towards like who's financially responsible and on the hook, right? And so oftentimes that means like an executive that needs to say, hey, yes, I've considered all the information and I still feel comfortable that we can move forward. So it's not just, someone who's saying, hey, we really need to just work with this vendor and we need to move forward. It's really kind of making sure that the executives are involved in that decision-making process and that they're held accountable. And that's the key thing I kind of mentioned earlier, that, if we do work with the vendor that we might consider a little bit more high risk, we'll put together a plan to kind of help manage and kind of what you talked about, kind of reduce that residual risk aspect of it. And we would also hold the executive accountable for making sure that that does occur. And so that, because ultimately they are responsible for that business relationship with the service provider. And that, we're leveraging that aspect to make sure that everybody involved, one, is making decisions eyes wide open, and then two, kind of being held accountable in that relationship. So that's really kind of how we try to hold true to kind of being able to manage that risk.
Perfect. Thank you.
Guys, anything you want to add, Aubra or Raphaël? The only thing we hadn't really covered yet is who else would be included in the decision-making process. Anything you want to highlight that others might not know about from this process?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Our solution is very similar to what Harry explained. So we have had a bunch of support from our EPs, our executive producers, around helping drive those changes that we want to see before an initial engagement or before we allow them to take on more work. So it might mean that the project is restricted until the security improvements can be made. So our EPs and then also our studio business team helps support us with making sure that we have security language in the contracts we have with our service providers. So that's another party that's really helpful.
Something I can add on my end, depending on the blast radius of a potential incident related to a setup of a mandate, we have an exception, like a risk acceptance process that we can unlock. So if the blast radius is at the production level, I'll give you an example. You have a beautiful internet exposed service for localization, and you are sure because you've done your pen test on this thing, it's secure. And when a partner access to this thing, he can only access one production, not two, just one. So the blast radius is one production. Now, like in this particular case, the final words goes to the producer. It's his data, it's his production. Our job is to explain the potential risks. So we are here to say, okay, this partner I can assure you that there is a high probability that he will leak your localization data. And that's it. At the end, he decides. But now, imagine a blast radius which is with multiple productions, or even worse, our engines. Somebody put a code cave, a malicious thing on our engine, which is deployed all over the world on all our players. Here, the blast radius is not the same. So in this particular case, our job is no longer to go on one producer, but our job is to escalate to like VP, if required, if please claim that. So we have this process which is called, it's a risk acceptance at the end. So my job is to present the risk, give all the information for higher hierarchy good decisions, and we escalate until we reach the right level of hierarchy. But sometimes it goes super high, like VP or CEO level, depending on the blast radius.
Yeah, and just to add on one point to Raphael's last comments, right? I think, yeah, sometimes it's absolute. So there are two types of engagement. One is a particular service provider providing services or engagement for a specific title or project or team. But there are also times maybe it's a service provider, it could be a SaaS solution, right? Like some kind of rigging tool or like some pipeline production system or whatsoever. And sometimes, and that's the time we really need to make sure we are clear on the data ownership, right? Like a specific game team or specific game's assets, source code. But sometimes there are solutions or engagement impacting multiple teams in the core production system. And that point of time, I guess it's kind of InfoSec or security's responsibility to make sure all data owners are involved in the discussion and make sure they understand that, hey, you want to onboard this service provider, but it's not only in the risk associated with yourself or your team, but it has a bigger and wider impact to that. So absolutely, I agree on that.
Thank you all so much. Looking at the time, we have about time for one more question. So this will be the one that ties it all up together with a bow. So how does the security risk of a service provider influences the options available for them to work? So for example, hardware, access, remote. So kind of all that process, everything we've been talking together. Ultimately, if you decide to work with them, what are then those levers that you have for their options available for them to work? We got 8 more minutes. Who wants to kick us off?
I guess from the first question, right? I did not putting like there are a lot of technical aspects that Aubra brought up. Absolutely amazing. I think we all kind of look for this core concept. But I think one of the key on a higher level is that for a lot of smaller service provider, or I guess more emergent service providers, right? They might just have a 50 people organization, and a lot of time they cannot buy all those shiny toys or EDR or whatever, like CrowdStrike, right? So, and but then I guess the point is that a lot of time it's really depending on how the service provider is willing to work with us on a lot of things, right? For example, if this service provider is critical to your team's business or core processes, but they do not have certain security control in place that should be in place at a bigger organization. It's really their willingness to say, hey, InfoSec, we want to work with you on this, right? Like, what are the best way? If we are, and at my current place, right? I think we definitely need to improve on that. But for example, a lot of time we will say, hey, if we are involved in a high level sensitive project and you have immature security practices, we just say, hey, let's ship them 5 laptops or devices so they can work on they can kind of work just as remote employees within our environment. Is it the most efficient? Maybe, maybe not, but I'm open to. Raphael mentioned about VM, which is, I guess, like more faster in deployment and more agile to some degree, but I'm also curious to hear other people's thoughts and
Yeah.
We'll do something similar to what you and Raphael explained with providing our own machines that they can access remotely, securely, with identities we provide. Another thing that we've had to do in the past when a security provider's security stance was weaker than we'd like, but also the sensitivity level was much weaker, was provide read-only access to low-risk documentation for them or reference materials, and then provide a place for them to, let's say, upload completed art files that we could scan before we bring them into our environment. And it's a very detached solution to avoid that security risk.
Yeah, on our end, we don't often provide Ubisoft hardware to our suppliers because there is a pain to manage the legal aspect of it. There is some licensing levels saying you are not allowed to use this license for a company which is not yours. You need these licenses instead. And listing all the different solutions with the legal team, we say, okay, might be painful. Let's try another thing. But yeah, at the end, we always find a solution. There is a no-go. I think on our end, we are quite in the same posture than all the people here.
Well, actually, with the little bit of time we have left, I'll throw in our maybe get to question, which is, what are some existing challenges you've seen in enabling service providers to work efficiently and quickly?
Yeah, I think kind of great question, Summer. And going back to kind of natural progression at question 4, right? When we say, hey, if there's I don't know, a Riot R&D product for ARPG or MMO, we don't want anybody else to get it to get a touch of that, right? So, but hey, let's ship hardwares to those people, to those service provider for them to work on, right? The first issue is always the prepping time of shipping those devices, and like Raphaël mentioned, the licenses. And once the devices get there, there's Aubra mentioned also the identity part. How do we provide, like why identity or, our own company's identity to those service provider quick enough that they can work on those projects, right? Like without too much of a delay. So I think that's the challenge I've been seeing so far. But yeah, curious to hear about others.
Yeah, I think it was mentioned earlier, kind of the shift to remote work or work from home being kind of the norm for many companies nowadays. That has certainly kind of impacted our ability of kind of getting service providers up and running pretty quickly. I think we've, obviously had traditional standard methods of which service providers were delivering work, but obviously, some of those models may not work well when we're talking about, thousands and thousands of different individual offices versus within an office location, right? And so, we certainly considered things like, hey, the notion and concept of bringing people to our data to do work versus shipping the data to them. Now, I know that that's always easier said than done, especially when you're working with service providers whose core value that they bring is some of the unique tooling that they might have. And so obviously, that might not work really well in a bring them to the data model. And so these are, the constant things that we're kind of working through, evolving. I really like what Aubra kind of mentioned before. It's a evolving process, whether it's how we're evaluating the risk posture of them, or even kind of how they're delivering work. It's an ongoing kind of evolution, I would say, kind of considering both from a perspective of, how do we continue safeguard our data, but then at the same time, reduce the friction so that reduce and manage the friction of doing work such that it doesn't become super cumbersome and almost impossible to do work, because that would defeat the purpose of engaging with the service provider. So it's always a balance.
I have a good one, which was really hard to manage. I don't know if you know the ID at Xbox program. It's a program managed by Xbox to deploy indie games on their platforms. We had the same exercise at Ubisoft. And for solo games, that's not a big deal. At the end, you need to deploy it on your platform. So you just receive the build and deploy it. That's it. The freelancer doesn't require a lot of access to your infrastructure. But now imagine it's a multiplayer game with items you can buy on the platform. Now you need to give access to the dev environment of your online services. And this is really sometimes not built for that or thinks for that. So you list the amount of access you need to provide to indie developers. Indie developers, it can be one person in his garage, super talented, but no security at all. And now you say, okay, we will provide you a full access to the Ubisoft network because you need access to that and that and that and that and that to deploy the multiplayer, create assets on your game so people can buy them, etc. And you say, okay, we are not ready for that. And now, like you say, okay, if we want to go with that, we need first to expose it maybe in a dedicated environment for indie dev, etc., etc. So this one was really a good learning to work with indie developers.
Thank you all so much. I do want to make sure we have time for the Q&A, so I will pass it over to Chris. What kind of questions are we getting?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. This has been a wonderful discussion. There are, as usual, far too many questions to get to for the remainder of the time, but thank you for everyone that submitted them. For the first couple, I may cater to the smaller to mid-sized service providers in the audience because I think there's quite a few of them today. So Julia Wilhelm asks, we're setting up a new office and I'd appreciate tips on securing a server room. Besides having restricted access, does it have to be waterproof, bulletproof, fireproof? Maybe you could share some perspective on that. Thank you.
I have a dedicated, if you're okay, I can take this one. Our questionnaire has subsections. So first, you need to say, do you have work from home? Do you have a data center? Are you making backup or not? And depending on that, we will ask you question or not. We will not ask you how you secure your data center if you don't have one. So monitor physical access, backup electrical systems, DC server room equipped with fire suppressions, and climate control.
Thanks, guys. So one of the attendees asks anonymously, and the panel touched on this earlier in the discussion. A reoccurring pain point we experience with security onboarding is gigantic. From the vendor perspective, it can feel baffling to complete in-depth worksheets interrogating our ability to protect something ultra-sensitive, like player payment data, for example, when the scope of our agreement may just be, for instance, art and IP services. So as security professionals, how do you look for vendors to handle these situations when completing these worksheets? Is it valuable to have the service provider answer to the best of their ability, even if it happens to be multiple pages of entering not applicable? What are your thoughts on this?
Dongli, you're muted.
Thanks, Summer. I think that's definitely a great point, and definitely something at least I've been noticing when we work with our partners and service providers. So what we are trying to do from our end, right, is to kind of customize or modularize our assessment or questionnaire based on the nature of service and then the level of sensitivity in terms of the data they will be having, right? So for example, if you absolutely have PHI, which is player house information, or payments, credit cards, right? Like there are certain elements we ask, I don't know, 200 questions. Hey, here it is, answer them all. But for low level engagement, we try to be as accommodating as we can. Hey, here's the 30, 50 question that we really care about. But from the service provider perspective, I would recommend to start from, again, transparency and communication, right? Even if our current engagement is limited to really low sensitive data sets or engagement, if you would love to work with us further, right, for future projects, it will be so much better for us to understand the full picture of your security posture, so that when another business units or team come in later to say, hey, Dongli, I want to work with those guys on another project, which they will have access to source code. And if we have that information up front to say, oh, they are clear, they are based on their security standards and controls, they are already cleared for full game builds, source code versus just an icon in game, right? Or emote. So I would say try to be as comprehensive as you could. And just be clear on what's the current things being offered but what's a full capability from your end, from your organization. I think that would be super helpful.
Yeah, one thing that I'll add to that, certainly I think it kind of goes back to the constant evolving, as Dongli mentioned, customizing. But another thing, and I actually saw someone in the audience kind of note this, is CyberGRX and leveraging them as like a basis, right? So if a service provider has already gone through that lengthy questionnaire with CyberGRX, sometimes we'll leverage that too as well, so that maybe that helps answer a lot of the baseline questions, and then we can focus more specific on the engagement specific things that would matter. And so that we've found to be very helpful in kind of streamlining that onboarding and assessment process as well.
Yeah, and agree with Harry on that, right? Like, I think the other question is about, hey, how do you feel about ISO or SOC 2? I think those are absolutely valuable to demonstrate your baseline security control of your overall enterprise, right? And then it will enable us to say, okay, there's an actual human being went into your office or server room to did A and B and C. So let's talk more about this engagement specific and how we can, facilitate this quicker, right? And to be honest, from our perspective, for any service provider that does have a valid SOC 2 that's applicable for the service, the time in terms of reviewing and assessing the posture and getting through the onboarding is indeed quicker, right? Comparatively quicker. I wouldn't say much quicker, but so just for your information.
Great, thanks, guys. Next question, again from an anonymous attendee. At what point in your review process do you conduct your security review? We meet with a lot of developers, and there isn't always an immediate project. Do you wait until there's a real tangible engagement before beginning the security review process?
I can take this one if you want. On our end, no, it's not us, the security team. It can be a codev partner, producer, or whatever. They oftenly just, when they exchange, can be in a forum, a meetup, a webinar like that. They just say, hey, your company interests me. Just in case, fulfill the IT questionnaire so you'll be ready to onboard quicker. They just have to provide an email. We add them to the portal to evaluate their IT posture and security posture. The IT posture is the endpoint with which we will connect them to ensure a good speed in the network. If somebody is in Italy, we'll connect it with France. If he's in China, Shanghai. So no, there is a lot of evaluation that we are doing, but we never contract with them. I don't know for you all. I'm curious.
Yeah, I think we are in a similar situation where we are trying to shift from engagement-based initiative to say, hey, for example, one of Summer's producer come to us to, hey, we have engagement. It's gonna happen in 2 weeks. Can you get that done? And we're like, we need more time or whatsoever, right? So, but we are trying to shift to a model where we would love to constantly working with a selected groups of partners or service providers on ongoing basis, right? Like to say, hey, we might not have a project for you guys right now, but we trust you guys, we love your guys' works. And to make that happen, can you go through the security review with us now? So later down the road, when somebody wants to work with you on builds, on a patch, on assets, on models, we can say, hey, the security is already done and valid for the past 6 months. Guys, go ahead with the onboarding itself or whatsoever, right? So that reduces the overhead in terms of assessing them, and which could be 2 weeks, 1 week, or a month or 2 months, right? So I think, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks, guys. See how many more questions we can get through in the next 5 minutes. So you guys already touched on this, but maybe you could get into a little bit more detail. So Julian Castano asks, how do you deal with the ever more present fully remote studios that have artisan teams scattered all over the world working with different types of machines?
Yeah, that's definitely a ongoing challenge for us as well. And I think again, some of the things that we're kind of considering in that regards is what are the things that we can do to kind of help um, ensure the safeguard of our data and the way that work is being done without so much reliance on how it's being done. And so what does that mean in practice? One of the things that we're looking into and doing more of is kind of that notion again that I mentioned earlier of bringing them to the data. So instead of saying that, hey, we need to assess everything about your controls in your home office and how everything is set up, we're going to do it where you're going to come into an environment that we actually manage and just deliver work. That way, we don't really have to concern ourselves too much about like the exact setup that you might have in your home office, because now it becomes a little bit more managed in the sense of like maybe some of the concerns that we may have had traditionally in the past of that kind of setup is maybe not as relevant anymore. So these are some of the things that we're kind of exploring to kind of help kind of be more adaptive to a work culture that's more remote.
Yeah, we had great challenges during the COVID because sometimes you work with partners and you sign contract that says, I give you this asset, but I want your employee to respect those conditions. Like for it, and it can be something like if this person is working from its office because it's COVID or whatever, uh, the office need to be closed and nobody else need to enter the company. And if the husband of your employee work in another gaming company, you need a key and they need to sign a contract, an NDA, like the husband. Like imagine the kind of thing that we had to, like it's really for given partners. I will not give names, but it's really exigent partners. It was really a challenge to manage because we entered the personal life of our employees, but you sign contracts sometimes. So it was really challenging.
So I think last question in summer, maybe this is a good segue into help you wrap things up here. So a question / comment from Andre Fauer says, one idea, and maybe even for XDS to champion, a document or resource with security best practices and solutions that is applicable to all major buyers. Depending on the size of the studio, implementing security on a corporate level may be too complicated or even too expensive. So what are the fundamentals that we need to achieve, and can that be shared universally?
I love that question for where can this really evolve as a conversation? I don't think we'd get to that decision here today, but I do think what we did was open up the conversation and build some relationships. And I really appreciate the panelists for joining. I appreciate our audience for coming in and joining from all different perspectives and roles within the industry of this space. Thank you so much to Chris and XDS Spark for giving us this platform to start the conversation. I agree. I think XDS Spark and XDS, the event is probably a good place to continue that conversation. And really to include security as part of that ongoing conversation. I know historically Dongli has never joined me at XDS, but maybe that's something that we should change, and we can bring in these partners together to have that conversation and keep this going. There's definitely pain felt on both sides. I think we talked about that in multiple forms today of having to manage a multi-hundred question thing that other studios care about the same stuff. So we'll keep this conversation going, and hopefully that will lead to some of these requested brilliant ideas. Anything else you want to add, Chris?
That's it. Summer panelists, thank you so much. We'll catch everyone at the next webinar or at XDS in Vancouver.
So thank you all so
Sure.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.